and you're awake again, heat rolling through your chest, then chills, and when you try to be close, it stings in a way nobody prepared you for, so you start wondering if you broke something in yourself. You keep hearing, "just aging," and honestly, that phrase can make you feel small in your own body. Look, here is the clinical reality nobody said out loud. Around 80% of OBGYN residents report no formal menopause curriculum. About 75% of symptomatic women go untreated. Estradiol can drop roughly 95% after menopause, and about 1 in 5 women report being dismissed in the office. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, because I want to see how far this conversation needs to travel. Now, stay with me, because the part that changes everything is not what you were told about stress, or willpower, or trying harder. The real issue is a hidden tissue-level hormone shift that gets mislabeled as personal failure, and most women only hear about it after years of pain. By the end of this conversation, you'll see exactly why your symptoms were never random and never your fault. You're lying there at 3 a.m., skin burning, then freezing, and when you try to be close, your body flinches before your mind can even answer. Then someone tells you it's just aging, and you start doubting yourself instead of doubting the explanation. Look, the numbers are brutal. About 80% of OBGYN residents report no formal menopause training. Roughly 75% of symptomatic women go untreated. Estradiol can fall by about 95% after menopause, and nearly 1 in 5 women say they were dismissed in the exam room. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching this from, because I want to know how far this conversation is reaching. Stay with me, because the part you were never told is not about willpower or attitude or trying harder in your relationship. It's a tissue-level hormone story with consequences most women only hear years too late. And yes, the silence ends in this room. In the next part, I'm going to show you the mechanism that explains far more than you were ever allowed to connect. Look, this did not start with you. Your mother likely went through this with no language, your grandmother with even less, and by the time you hit that first appointment between ages 47 and 55, the script was already waiting. Dryness is normal, pain is normal, just push through. Before the 1960s, menopause was mostly handled as something to endure quietly, not something to treat precisely. So silence became family inheritance, passed down like an heirloom nobody wanted. And what happened next, in the early 2000s, turned that quiet into fear so fast it still shapes your care today. Then 2002 hit, and a single headline culture swallowed nuance whole. The WHI conversation was broadcast as one warning for everyone, even though the average trial participant was about 63, not the woman in front of me at 51 who suddenly could not sleep or tolerate intimacy. Within roughly a year, overall hormone prescribing dropped about 38%, and for some products, the fall was far steeper. Clinics got scared, patients got scared, and the question stopped being, "What do your tissues need right now?" It became, "How do we avoid risk at all costs?" I'm going to show you why that substitution caused decades of unnecessary pain. And while that fear spread, training never caught up. In residency data, only 20.8% of OBGYN trainees reported formal menopause curriculum, and just 6.8% across OBGYN, family medicine, and internal medicine felt prepared to manage menopause care. So you walk into a short visit, insurance authorizations discourage longer symptom workups, and culturally, you've been taught to keep this private anyway. Friends joke, media erases women over 50, and you start thinking this is a personal weakness. Honestly, this is the threshold moment when untreated symptoms start progressing and someone finally tells you it might be in your head. The first failure was structural, not personal. Training programs taught doctors to move fast through menopause symptoms. Then, the post-WHI fear narrative taught everyone to hesitate, even when your pain was right there in front of them. So when you came in during perimenopause or after menopause saying intimacy hurt, the visit often got reduced to stress advice and lubricant. In a Mayo cohort of nearly 5,000 women ages 45 to 60, only about 1 in 4 was receiving treatment. That is not random. That is what happens when the system is designed to under-recognize what your tissues are actually signaling. Then the second layer moved in, a wellness market ready to sell hope without clinical follow-through. Globally, menopause products were already a multi-billion-dollar business, estimated around $17.79 billion in one recent cycle, and supplements took the overwhelming share, while many women with painful sex, urinary burning, and sleep disruption stayed undertreated. Your mother was told to endure. You were told to optimize. Different language, same silence. And here is the part most people miss. The core injury is often in estrogen-responsive genital and urinary tissue, where pH and blood flow shift before your confidence does. Look, the center of this is not your relationship, and it is not a character flaw. It is tissue biology. You have estrogen-responsive receptors in well over 400 tissues, including the vulva, vagina, bladder neck, pelvic floor, and the urethra that gets blamed for recurrent UTIs. As estrogen support falls, vaginal pH can shift from the protective acidic range around 4.5 towards 6.0 or higher, and the tissue gets thinner, drier, easier to injure. That is why just use lubricant often fails. And the part almost nobody told you is this process is progressive, so what looks small now can compound fast. Now, the brain layer, because this is where women get mislabeled. In 30 years of practice, I have seen this exact pattern thousands of times. And I lived it myself at 52. I still remember standing at my bathroom sink before sunrise, tile cold under my feet, heart fluttering like a phone vibrating in my chest, thinking, why can't I calm down? Frequent vasomotor symptoms can run a median 7.4 years, with persistence around 4.5 years after the final menstrual period. So your sleep debt becomes chemical, not just emotional. I'll show you next why that brain stress signal spills directly into metabolism. Then metabolism and the stress axis get pulled in. When sleep is repeatedly fragmented, your HPA axis stays on alert and cortisol stays noisy, so your body starts storing fat viscerally, even when your habits did not suddenly collapse. That is biology, not lack of discipline. At the same time, testosterone, which in younger women is produced at roughly 300 micrograms per day from ovarian and adrenal sources, usually declines and is rarely assessed with the right assay in routine visits. So these mechanisms stack: tissue pain, brain alarm, metabolic shift. And once you see how they stack, the next clinical reality finally clicks into place. Look, let me explain what is actually happening in your body. As ovarian signaling becomes erratic, cycle gaps can stretch past 60 days, and day 2 to day 5 FSH is often above 25 IUL in late transition. That is your brain asking your ovaries for output they can no longer deliver in a stable pattern. In longitudinal hormone tracking, late perimenopause cycles are more than 60% anovulatory, and luteal progesterone metabolite output drops about 6.6% each year. So your tissue support becomes intermittent, then unreliable. If the core signal is unstable, how could just relax ever be enough? Now add sleep physiology, because this is where you start blaming yourself for being too sensitive. In detailed perimenopause sleep studies, median nightly awakenings sit around 1.5. Wake after sleep onset is about 24.3 minutes, and sleep onset latency averages near 20.0 minutes. Objective monitoring shows 78% of nighttime hot flashes coincide with wake episodes, and the odds of waking around a flash rise to 5.31. So repair sleep gets fragmented, cortisol stays loud, hunger signaling shifts, and your body stores defensively. You feel wired and exhausted in the same hour. What do you think that does to intimacy by evening? I had a patient last month, I'll call her Sarah, and I can still see her hands shaking while she said, "I feel like I am disappearing." She had burning with intercourse, urinary urgency, and this private fear that her marriage was ending because she had stopped being a woman. I told her this was genitourinary syndrome of menopause, a progressive estrogen and androgen tissue deprivation state that affects roughly 27% to 84% of postmenopausal women, not a relationship defect. Then she went quiet, looked up, and said, "So I'm not broken. I'm untreated?" That moment matters, but what comes next matters even more. Here is the metabolic layer most women never get told. Visceral fat accumulation accelerates around the final menstrual period, with annual VAT increases measured at 8.2% in the late transition window and 5.8% afterward, even after lifestyle adjustment. In parallel, insulin resistance can rise about 8.7% per year during the transition versus 4.2% later and 1.4% earlier in midlife. That is why the old advice feels like walking uphill on marbles. Effort is real, but the biology moved. When insulin signaling shifts and cortisol stays elevated, genital tissue healing also suffers. So what happens when this runs untreated for years? Then bone enters the story, and this is where eat less and exercise more becomes dangerously incomplete. During the transition window, lumbar spine bone loss averages about 2.5% per year, and femoral neck around 1.7%, then slows to roughly 1.1% after that early phase. So the same hormonal cascade hurting sleep, mood, metabolism, and intimacy is also quietly reshaping fracture risk. This is not one symptom. It is one physiology showing up in many rooms of your life at once, like a house alarm nobody explained. And if this is the mechanism, what old belief are you still carrying that has to collapse now? You are not crazy. You are not alone. You did the walking, the cleaner meals, the breathing apps, the lubricant, the try to relax advice, and still your body kept pulling away from touch. That is the turning point. When symptoms persist despite effort, we stop calling it mindset and call it mechanism. Your vaginal and urinary tissues lost hormonal support, nerve endings became more reactive, blood flow dropped, and your brain started pairing intimacy with threat instead of safety. So the shame you carried was never evidence against you, it was evidence your biology was being ignored. And this is where the old story breaks for good, because once you see the cascade, you cannot unsee it. Sleep disruption drives stress signaling amplifies pain sensitivity, pain reshapes desire, and then you get blamed for withdrawing. Honestly, this is the moment many women feel quiet anger rise in their chest, and they should. Somebody, somewhere, decided this conversation was not worth having with you at the right time. That is not aging. That is a hormone shift nobody explained to you. Now let's talk about the cost of leaving it untreated. If you keep accepting silence for the next 1 to 3 years, the pattern usually tightens, not softens. Night sweats keep breaking sleep. Pain with intimacy teaches your body to brace before touch, and desire drops because your nervous system is protecting you from expected pain. Then mood gets shorter, patience thins, and you start apologizing for symptoms you did not choose. I watch women become strangers to themselves in this window, like living in a house where the lights flicker every night and nobody checks the wiring. So ask yourself, what happens when this keeps running unchecked? And the psychological cost is happening now, not later. Around 70% of women in this transition report significant anxiety symptoms, and the risk of depressive symptoms is roughly doubled in perimenopause compared with earlier reproductive years. You are trying to function on fragmented sleep, inflamed stress signaling, and pain you were told to ignore, then blaming your character for the fallout. Look, that is not resilience training. That is clinical strain. If your mind feels less steady than it used to, what if that is a hormone-linked burden still being mislabeled as personality? From 3 to 10 years, the consequences become more structural. Genitourinary syndrome tends to become chronic and progressive when untreated, so dryness can evolve into burning, urgency, recurrent urinary discomfort, and avoidance that starts shaping relationships and identity. Bone vulnerability also accelerates in the early postmenopause window, with losses reaching up to about 20% across the first 5 years for some women. That is a major biological shift happening while many women are still told to wait it out. If the tissue changes are progressive, why are you being offered advice that assumes they are temporary? By 10 to 30 years, you are no longer talking about inconvenience, you are talking about trajectory. About 1 in 2 women past age 50 will experience an osteoporosis-related fracture, and heart disease remains the leading killer of women over 60. Add the cognitive burden of long-term sleep disruption, vascular risk, and untreated symptoms, and families start noticing changes you were privately carrying for years. This is where many women grieve time lost, not because they did something wrong, but because the right conversation arrived too late. So what do you do before this becomes your default future? This is the part where urgency should feel clean, not terrifying. You are suffering needlessly only if you keep accepting silence as the answer. You still have room to change the arc, and the next steps are practical, medical, and absolutely worth taking. Drop a comment and tell me which of these consequences you were told was just stress or just aging. This is not personal failure. This is inherited silence with measurable physical cost. If nothing changes, the pattern usually gets tighter, not kinder. The sleep stays broken, so your nerves stay on edge. Intimacy starts to feel like a doorway your body braces against before your mind even decides. You begin editing your life around symptoms nobody explained, and that quiet editing is exhausting. Look, I've watched women become careful in their own homes, careful in their own marriages, careful in their own skin. And when your body is always guarding, desire doesn't disappear by choice. It disappears by protection. Then comes the part people don't see from the outside. You stop reaching for closeness because you're afraid of pain. Then you feel guilty for pulling away. Then you blame yourself for the distance that follows. It can feel like carrying a private grief no one can name. You're still showing up for work, for family, for everyone else, but inside you feel like a stranger in a familiar room. And every time someone says, just stress, the shame digs in deeper, even though stress was never the root mechanism. Leave this untreated long enough, and it moves beyond comfort into trajectory. Bone resilience can erode quietly while you're being told to wait it out. Urinary symptoms can become recurrent and disruptive. Cardiometabolic strain can build in the background while you focus on surviving each day and each night. So this is not about vanity, and it is not about getting your old self back. This is about preserving function, confidence, and health span while you still have leverage to change the direction of your care. So I want you to do something simple and honest right now. Share below which consequence you are living in this moment. Is it pain with intimacy, broken sleep, urinary urgency, sudden anxiety, or that heavy self-blame no one warned you about? Or tell me which one you were told was just stress or just aging. I read these comments because they map the silence in real time, and because naming it out loud is often the first moment your body stops being treated like a personal failure. You were adapting to a physiology no one translated for you, and that adaptation came with a cost. The cost is not only physical, it touches identity, relationships, and the way you trust your own signals. But once you can name the pattern, you can stop negotiating against yourself and start asking for care that matches your biology. That shift matters more than people realize, and it starts here, with clarity instead of blame. This is not personal failure. This is inherited silence with measurable physical cost. Tomorrow morning, walk into that visit with language, not apology. Say, "Doctor, have you completed any continuing education in menopause management in the last 5 years?" Then say, "I'd like to request a full hormone panel, including estradiol, progesterone, testosterone, and thyroid." And add, "How are you distinguishing genitourinary syndrome of menopause from normal aging in my case, and how do you discuss local versus systemic hormone risk?" Look, this is hard. You are asking a system that failed you to suddenly serve you. But now you have the language it responds to, and you are not failing. You were never told the truth about what was happening to you. If you get brushed off, stay calm and read this exactly. "I understand my labs may appear within standard range. I'm experiencing pain with intimacy, vaginal burning, urinary urgency, and sleep disruption, and I'd like these investigated as potential hormonal causes, not dismissed as stress or aging. Request these by clinical name: comprehensive hormone panel, beyond standard TSH, DEXA scan for bone density if you are over 50, fasting insulin if weight changed despite stable habits, and FSH if perimenopause stage is unclear." Search Menopause Society directories and look for NAMS certified menopause practitioner credentials. You are not a woman with a failing body. You are a woman with clinical clarity and practical tools to demand the care you deserve. Before you leave, sit with this for a second. How many years did you spend negotiating with pain, shrinking yourself, apologizing for symptoms because nobody translated the biology in plain language? Look, that question should stay with you tonight. Not to scare you and not to blame you, but to mark the moment you stop calling this a personal weakness. Your body was giving signals the whole time. The care system heard them late. And from this point forward, you do not go back to silence, because the silence ends in this room. In the next conversation, I'm going to take you one layer deeper. How to identify a menopause-trained clinician in your country before you lose another short appointment to dismissal, and the exact questions that expose whether you'll be heard or minimized. If this made something click, share your story below and tell me what you needed to hear today that you had never heard before. I read everyone. Take care of yourself. I will see you in the next one. Before you go, sit with one hard question tonight. How many years did you spend negotiating with pain, apologizing for distance, and doubting your own mind when your body was asking for clinical care the whole time? I want you to put that in words. Share your story below because I read every one. Tell me what you needed to hear today that you were never told in an exam room. If this finally made something click, say that too. Naming it is not drama. Naming it is where silence loses control. In the next conversation, I'll walk you through how to spot a truly menopause-trained clinician before you lose another appointment to vague reassurance and rushed dismissal. You do not need more slogans. You need precision, timing, and the right language when it counts. Leave your comment and let me know what part of your story you are done hiding. Take care of yourself. I will see you in the next one.